Greetings, and welcome to the story of a technological marvel that changed the face of aerial combat forever. The German Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter. On a stormy October afternoon in 1944, high above the skies near Asselt in the Netherlands, a formation of Canadian Spitfires faced an unprecedented threat. A sleek, silver missile streaking through the purple horizon at unimaginable speed. No propeller, no enemy aircraft, but a jet-powered wonder from the future. How did a fighter with no equal in combat up to that point suddenly appear, and what vulnerabilities did it reveal? Could a propeller-driven fighter like the P-51 finally turn the tide against this seemingly invincible marvel? And what secrets did the German engineers hide in the face of relentless Allied pressure? In those fleeting moments, a single shot confirmed the first kill of a jet fighter by gunfire in aerial history, shattering the myth of German invincibility and exposing a critical weakness. Within months, American pilots would systematically exploit this flaw, transforming their aircraft into relentless hunters. But at what cost did this technological leap come? How did the jet's fragile engines, plagued by thermal creep and sluggish throttle response, turn a symbol of innovation into a battlefield liability? And during crucial takeoff and landing phases, how vulnerable was the Me 262 to the very tactics that would eventually undermine its dominance? All these fragments of the puzzle point to one burning question. Was the Me 262 truly unstoppable? Or was its promise doomed by its own design flaws and the relentless ingenuity of Allied tactics? This video will trace the rise and fall of the jet's fleeting dominance, separating myth from reality, and revealing how daring pilots, relentless innovation, and strategic perseverance ultimately rendered the world's first operational jet fighter a symbol of both human ingenuity and strategic limitations. So, prepare to delve into the extraordinary story of the Me 262, where cutting-edge technology met its greatest challenge, and where human courage carved the path to victory from the chaos of war's final chapter. The most astonishing battles are about to begin. On the stormy afternoon of October the 5th, in the year of 1944, high above the skies near Asselt in the Netherlands, a significant event unfurled that would enter the annals of aviation history. A formation of 5 brave pilots from the distinguished No. 401 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force was gracefully maneuvering, their Spitfire Mark 9s shimmering brilliantly under the autumn sun's rays. These aircraft, symbols of Allied resilience, cruised at a carefully chosen altitude, maintaining vigilance in the tense aerial environment of a war-torn Europe. It was then that squadron leader Smith, observing keenly from his position, was the first to catch sight of an extraordinary phenomenon streaking through the heavens. His sharp eyes fixed on a dazzling silver line cutting through the pastel purple sky at an astonishing velocity. This was no ordinary enemy aircraft. It was a sleek, unfamiliar shape with no propeller in sight. A pure jet-propelled missile carving through the air with unthinkable speed. The craft's profile was alien in every way. A pale, sharp-edged silhouette that darted like a metallic arrow, faster than any of the Canadian fighters had encountered in actual combat up to that point. The object banked sharply, its exhaust producing faint, wispy trails that shimmered against the horizon's deep violet hue. It was a Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalle, a jet fighter that Germany had touted as a game-changer. A wonder weapon from their darkest technological ambitions. For 3 long years, whispered rumors and secret intelligence reports had hinted at the Germans' progress toward jet-powered aircraft, but witnessing such a craft firsthand made the truth suddenly inescapable and palpable. This was no speculative rumor. It was a brutal, roaring reality racing past them at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour. In response, squadron leader Smith immediately reached for his radio, his voice ringing out to his fellow pilots, Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair, ordering them into attack positions. The air became tense with anticipation and rapid coordination as the 5 fighters prepared to confront this new kind of adversary. What transpired in that moment was a milestone. The first confirmed kill of a jet fighter by gunfire in aerial combat history. It was a piercing crack in the myth of German invincibility, a crack that shattered the propaganda-laden narrative of the Me-262 as an unbeatable marvel. The sleek, terrifying shape had just revealed a critical weakness, a fatal flaw that, once understood, could be exploited. Within mere months following that fateful encounter, American pilots flying the P-51 Mustang would leverage this vulnerability systematically, turning their aircraft into precision instruments of relentless hunting. Their skill and ingenuity aimed to neutralize the technological edge that the Germans had believed would forever secure their dominance in the skies. Despite the Me-262's revolutionary design, its vulnerabilities would soon make it an increasingly rare sight, an almost obsolete weapon despite its promise as the technological pinnacle of wartime aviation. The impact of this first jet encounter transcended the physical realm of air battles. It sent shockwaves through the morale and strategic calculations of Allied forces. Fighters across Europe who witnessed the event understood immediately that the art and science of aerial combat had undergone a fundamental transformation. The era of propeller-driven fighters, which had dominated the skies for years, was giving way to an age where speed, altitude, and technological sophistication could dictate the outcome of any engagement. Captain Chuck Jagger, commanding officer of the 357th Fighter Group stationed at Royal Air Force Lyon, was among those seized by a growing sense of urgency. The intelligence briefings that he received grew increasingly concerning as they detailed the Me-262's capabilities. A top speed of close to 540 miles per hour in level flight. A figure that outstripped the P-51 Mustang's maximum speed of approximately 437 miles per hour. This meant, quite plainly, that the German jet could outrun the Allies' best fighters in a straight chase, rendering traditional dogfighting tactics effectively useless. The mathematical certainty was harsh but undeniable. Should the Luftwaffe decide to deploy these jets in significant numbers, with adequately trained pilots and the right fuel supplies, the entire strategic bombing campaign that was systematically crippling German industry could be dealt a severe blow. The audaciously slow and lumbering B-17 flying fortresses, often flying at speeds around 180 miles per hour amid flak and enemy fighters, would be defenseless targets against aircraft capable of striking from virtually any angle and then disappearing before their escort fighters could even react. For the first time since the Allies had achieved air superiority over Europe, the possibility that this dominance might be challenged loomed ominously on the horizon. However, the true danger inherent in the Me-262's revolutionary design was rooted in the very nature of jet propulsion technology as it existed in the year of 1944. The Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines manufactured the phenomenon known as thermal creep was a persistent and troubling issue for the Jumo 004B engines, especially under combat conditions. During wartime operations, these engines typically required a complete overhaul after approximately 10 hours of intensive use, with a full engine replacement often becoming necessary after about 25 hours of active service. This relentless cycle of maintenance and replacement meant that, after merely 3 or 4 combat missions, the iconic Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter was often left grounded because of engine failure, forcing the German ground crews into a logistical nightmare that proved exceedingly difficult to manage and ultimately impossible to resolve fully. The challenges posed by the engine's throttle response further compounded these operational difficulties. Unlike traditional piston engines, which responded almost instantaneously to changes in throttle input, the JUMO 004 was hampered by a considerable delay in power adjustment. This lag meant that pilots could not simply and swiftly increase or decrease thrust. Instead, they had to carefully modulate the throttle with a high degree of finesse. Forging this delicate balance was necessary because advancing the throttle too quickly injected an excessive amount of fuel into the combustion chambers before the airflow could increase sufficiently to match it. This imbalance caused the temperature within the jet pipe to surge dramatically, risking the overheating of turbine blades and, consequently, engine failure. In combat, where split seconds often dictated life or death, this sluggish throttle response was not merely an inconvenience but a critical tactical weakness. The fighter's inability to respond rapidly to combat maneuvers turned it into a more vulnerable target, especially during moments requiring quick acceleration or precise adjustments. The pilot's need for gentle, incremental throttle changes meant that the Me-262, despite its remarkable speed at high altitude, could struggle to keep pace or evade pursuers during crucial combat phases. Particularly during takeoff and landing procedures, these engine limitations became extraordinarily dangerous and amplified the aircraft's vulnerabilities on the battlefield. The Me-262, with its unusually high wing loading of about 294 kilograms per square meter, indicating a heavy aircraft relative to its wing size, needed to reach takeoff speeds exceeding 110 miles per hour, with similar velocities necessary during landing approaches. The process of getting airborne was painstakingly slow. Once the pilot released the brakes, it typically took nearly 30 seconds for the aircraft to accelerate to flying speed, all the while the engines struggled to generate enough thrust to increase airspeed at low velocities. During this crucial acceleration phase, the aircraft was essentially a sitting duck. Its inability to rapidly build up speed meant that while on the runway, it moved forward in a straight line at a predictable pace, with little to no ability to alter heading or evade potential threats from the ground or air. Any Allied fighter that managed to catch an Me-262 during this vulnerable takeoff window faced an almost stationary target, incapable of rapid acceleration or evasive maneuvers, rendering it far more susceptible to attack. The vulnerabilities persisted during landing as well. As Me-262 pilots approached their airfields after missions lasting between 60 and 90 minutes, a duration that often left fuel gauges dangerously low, they faced the double danger of decelerating from high speeds in a controlled manner while reconfiguring their aircraft's flaps and landing gear. During these final moments, the aircraft's high-speed characteristics turned into liabilities, as the fighter descended straight and level into the airfield, again becoming an easy target for enemy defenses. The combination of the aircraft's high wing loading and the engine's responsiveness issues meant that the Me-262 was most vulnerable during these low-speed regimes, despite its overall technological sophistication. The innovative jet engines that endowed the Me-262 with unparalleled high-altitude performance and speed ultimately turned into their own liabilities during takeoff and landing phases. Intelligence officers working with the United States 8th Air Force in England recognized this problem early on. Throughout the late summer and into the early autumn of 1944, they systematically studied the issues faced by German jet pilots, leveraging photo reconnaissance missions and analysis of combat footage. These aerial reconnaissance efforts revealed the locations of numerous Me-262 bases at Amma, Hepe, Rena, Lechfeld, and Munich Re, providing critical intelligence concerning the fighter's operational patterns. The analysis of gun camera footage from the handful of encounters between Allied fighters and the Me-262 uncovered a dual nature. While the jet's high-speed capabilities granted it a significant advantage at altitude, the aircraft's performance at low speeds was notably inferior. Allied intelligence understood that after high-speed intercepts, during which the jet fighters had burned through most of their fuel, they were compelled to return to these designated airfields because the specialized J-2 fuel required for jet engines was available exclusively at these locations. This restriction on fuel supply meant that the German jets could not divert to alternative bases, a vulnerability that Allied intelligence exploited to anticipate and prepare for their movements. The reliance on specific fuel amenities and designated airfields created predictable patterns that enhanced Allied strategic planning, allowing them to target these aircraft more effectively, especially during the vulnerable takeoff and landing phases where their engine response lag and limited acceleration posed critical dangers. The geographical realities of the European theater at that time inadvertently created a strategic opening for the Allies. Because of the limited airspace and the positioning of German jet bases, Allied fighter pilots realized that if they could manage to loiter, meaning to stay in the vicinity, for a sufficient period near these known jet assembly points, they could initiate surprise attacks during the aircraft's most vulnerable moments, specifically during takeoff or landing. Executing this tactic, however, required considerable patience and endurance. Pilots had to be prepared to fly long missions, often directly into heavily defended areas filled with enemy anti-aircraft artillery and fighter patrols, while conserving enough fuel to remain operational for the extended duration needed to capitalize on these opportunities. Such operations demanded a level of bravery and stamina, as they entailed risking confrontation in some of the most fiercely defended airspaces in Germany. This approach became the only viable method for propeller-driven Allied fighters, such as the venerable P-51 Mustangs, to have a fighting chance against the technologically advanced German jet fighters, notably the Messerschmitt Me-262. The Luftwaffe recognized this vulnerability almost immediately after suffering their first losses to these jets. In response, they quickly intensified their defenses, establishing extensive anti-aircraft gun corridors, often called flak alleys, along common approach routes leading to the jet bases. These corridors were heavily fortified with various calibers of anti-aircraft artillery, including the formidable 88mm guns, the quick-firing 37mm automatic cannons, and multiple 20mm gun systems arranged in layered curtain-like patterns. These formidable firewalls were deliberately designed to make penetrating these zones exceedingly dangerous for any attacking Allied fighter. To provide additional protection during critical phases such as takeoff and landing, the Luftwaffe assigned some of their most advanced piston-powered fighters to serve as top cover. Aircraft like the Focke-Wulf FW-190D and the rarer TAR-152H were kept on standby near these bases, ready to intercept attacking aircraft attempting to attack or defend the jet operators during their most exposed moments. In an effort to keep the Allies uncertain and unprepared, the Germans resorted to tactics such as randomizing flight schedules whenever feasible. This measure aimed to prevent Allied fighters from predicting the exact moments when jets would be taking off or landing. Some bases even deployed decoy aircraft, false targets meant to lure enemy fighters into carefully prepared anti-aircraft traps, breaking the continuity of the attacking force's plans. Enhanced logistical measures also contributed to these defensive efforts. The Autobahn near certain jet bases was converted into makeshift emergency landing strips, cleverly camouflaged with woodland and concealed parking areas, allowing the Me-262s to operate from locations that remained hidden from the keen eyes of Allied reconnaissance and intelligence. Such tactics helped maintain some operational secrecy, complicating Allied efforts to identify and target the jet bases accurately. Despite all these highly organized and aggressive defenses, the fundamental tactical challenge persisted. The Me-262s still had to take off from and land at their bases, during which they became particularly vulnerable, regardless of the number of ground-based guns defending them. Their need to accelerate to high speeds on takeoff and decelerate upon landing exposed their most fragile phases, providing fleeting but critical opportunities for the determined Allied fighters to strike. Amidst these ongoing struggles in late 1944, a young pilot from Detroit, Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group, became increasingly familiar with the emerging threat posed by the German jets during his missions over Germany. Just 21 years old, Drew had experienced a jet encounter during a previous sortie, which he documented in meticulous detail, noting its impressive speed, maneuverability, and armament. By early October, Drew's intelligence reports highlighted the vulnerability of the Me-262s, especially during their takeoff and landing phases. When new information revealed a concentration of these jets at a specific airfield in northwestern Germany, Akma Aerodrome, Drew was immediately called upon to lead a daring fighter sweep against this target. His prior encounter with the jets made him the ideal candidate to execute this mission, relying heavily on the element of surprise to succeed. Before the sortie, Drew carefully briefed his fellow pilots, emphasizing that their success depended on approaching the target without warning, engaging aggressively, and being willing to accept the risks involved in flying directly through dense German flak defenses. He stressed the importance of maintaining a tight formation and sharp situational awareness to maximize their chances of survival and impact. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, who had been flying with him in countless missions, was assigned to stick with Drew at all costs, regardless of what might happen during the attack. Drew's aircraft, a P-51 Mustang with the callsign E-2D and affectionately nicknamed Detroit Miss, loaded with full internal fuel and additional wing tanks, boasted an endurance of nearly 4 hours. On that October afternoon, under broken clouds with generally good visibility and ideal conditions as the tension in the skies reached a boiling point, Drew prepared his aircraft for the critical moments ahead, meticulously setting himself for the imminent engagement. With a steady hand, he advanced the throttle, thrusting the Mustang into a daring dive that rapidly accelerated towards its maximum speed, causing the aircraft to plummet through the air while losing altitude at a remarkable rate. Meanwhile, behind him on the runway, the German Me-262s jets commenced their own takeoff run, their engines roaring as they gained momentum to join the fray. Just as Drew's fighter streaked past at over 400 miles per hour in free fall, the lead jet, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, an experienced and formidable pilot, had already reached roughly 80 miles per hour. It was at this precise moment that Drew opened fire from his position at approximately 800 yards, pouring a devastating volley of rounds from his 650 caliber machine guns. The tracer rounds traced a fiery path through the air, converging on the accelerating Me-262, illuminating the runway in a haunting glow. The tracers found their mark, striking Arnold's right engine with deadly precision. The violent explosion ripped through the turbine, causing Arnold's jet to jerk violently as the engine disintegrated into flaming debris. However, by this stage, Arnold's aircraft was already traveling too fast, its speed too high, to allow for an abort. The crippled jet lurched forward, struggling to stay airborne on its remaining engine, unable to maintain altitude or pick up enough speed to escape the danger zone. Drew closed the gap to about 400 yards and fired again, this time targeting the cockpit in a calculated attempt to incapacitate the pilot. The burst struck home, splattering the canopy and cockpit area with shrapnel and fuel. Arnold's aircraft responded dramatically. It rolled inverted, spinning out of control, and then plunged violently into the thick cover of trees beside the runway. The resulting impact caused the aircraft to explode into a fiery inferno, scattering debris in all directions. Meanwhile, the second Me-262, piloted by Lieutenant Gerd Kaubert, had been a witness to the destruction of Arnold's jet. Seeing his comrade's plane go down, Kaubert quickly tried to abort his own takeoff, hoping to avoid the same fate. Yet, the aircraft's sluggish throttle response combined with a high landing speed made rapid deceleration almost impossible. Despite his efforts, Kaubert's jet was still moving at high velocity when Drew disengaged from his initial attack and repositioned to make a second pass. As Drew pulled out of his first run, McCandless, his wingman, issued urgent warnings about incoming flak, warning that German anti-aircraft defenses had found their range. Explosive shells, 88mm rounds, detonated in black puffs, bursting around the attacking Mustangs with deadly precision. Ignoring the dangerous barrage, Drew dove once more, aiming directly at Kaubert's Me-262. His aircraft unleashed a long, destructive burst into the fleeing jet as it tried to turn off the runway. The shells struck the fuselage and both engines, sending sparks and shrapnel showering across the aircraft's surface. The Me-262 slowed dramatically, engulfed in flames as fuel ignited within the tanks, transforming the sleek fighter into a blazing wreck. Kaubert managed to bail out, escaping the inferno before his aircraft was entirely consumed, but the plane was beyond saving, completely destroyed. In less than 2 minutes, Drew had managed to eliminate 2 of Germany's most advanced and formidable fighters, a feat that would later be recognized as a major tactical success. His aggressive tactics and clinical timing demonstrated a vital lesson of aerial combat. Raw technological advantage mattered little during those fleeting, critical moments of flight when skill, speed, and decisive action could turn the tide. The engagement served as a stark reminder that daring offensive maneuvers, executed with precision, could neutralize even the most technologically sophisticated enemies like the Me-262. However, despite the magnitude of his achievements, Drew's gun camera malfunctioned during the fight, leaving no photographic record of his victories. His only witness, McCandless, had suffered his own fate, being struck by flak during their hasty retreat from Acma, which resulted in him being shot down and taken prisoner. Without visual evidence or corroborating witness testimony, the military command structure initially refused to credit Drew with the confirmed kills, a bitter disappointment considering that he had, in reality, scored one of the most significant tactical victories of the aerial campaign. It would take almost 4 decades before Drew received official acknowledgement of his actions. Only in 1983, after meticulous cross-referencing of German Luftwaffe archives with American records, was his feat finally recognized and validated. Heretofore, the truth lay buried within classified documents, hidden until the historical record could be thoroughly re-examined. Among the German witnesses was Georg Peter Ed, an ace pilot of the Luftwaffe, who had been scheduled to on May 12 of the year 1983. A significant recognition was bestowed upon Drew by the United States Air Force. This honor, the prestigious Air Force Cross, was awarded in acknowledgement of his extraordinary bravery and exceptional skill during a flight mission. The award presentation took place amidst a formal ceremony attended by high-ranking officials, and it was conducted with great dignity and respect. The ceremony was personally hosted by the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, Vern Orr, who took great pride in honoring Drew's valor. To mark the importance of this occasion, Drew and his wife were flown from Johannesburg, located in South Africa, all the way across the Atlantic to the United States, specifically for the event. Their journey was aboard a large military transport aircraft, a C-141 Starlifter, renowned for its impressive range and capacity. This aircraft was used to ensure a smooth and comfortable passage for the couple, reflecting the high regard in which Drew's achievements were held. What makes Drew's story even more remarkable is that he remains the first and, to this day, the only Allied pilot who managed to shoot down 2 enemy jet aircraft within a single combat mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. This feat defies the conventional expectations of aerial combat during that era and highlights his exceptional talent and daring maneuvers. The significance of this achievement is amplified by the fact that jet aircraft were considered the new dawn of aerial warfare, and a propeller-driven fighter routinely engaging and defeating jets was exceedingly rare and extraordinary. Turning back the clock to October 7 of the year 1944, we find another intriguing episode involving the clash between Allied pilots and German jet aircraft, specifically the notorious Messerschmitt Me-262. On this day, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper, who was part of the 479th Fighter Group, might have scored a victory against a Me-262 during a combat mission over Germany. However, despite the reports and claims, there remains some uncertainty about whether this was definitively a confirmed kill. ZMP, as he was often called, was among the most seasoned and capable fighter leaders in the 8th Air Force, known for his tactical acumen and leadership during perilous missions. During this particular engagement, he believed he was attacking a Messerschmitt Bf 109, another German fighter aircraft. The battle took place in the challenging skies over Nazi-occupied territory, and Zemper's gun camera footage was ambiguous, showing an aircraft that could have been either a Bf 109 or an Me-262. Post-war analysis continued to debate this footage. Many experts agreed that the aircraft was most likely a jet, but conclusive confirmation about the victory was never officially recorded. The lack of certainty did little to diminish the emerging pattern that these jets were tricky opponents. More important than the precise details of any single victory was the broader strategic revelation that American fighter pilots were beginning to uncover. Despite the Me-262's revolutionary speed and technological advantages, they realized that such aircraft could be overcome through clever tactical innovation. The key to success lay not in engaging these jets within their preferred and seemingly invincible environment of high-altitude, high-speed dogfights but rather in forcing them into vulnerable phases of flight, where their speed advantage diminished. This tactical adjustment was instrumental in challenging the myth of the invincibility of these German jets. The following month, on November 6 of the year 1944, another notable encounter occurred that further demonstrated the ingenuity and bravery of Allied pilots. Leading a bomber escort mission near Akma, a small town in Germany, was Chuck Jagger, a pilot flying a P-51 Mustang that he affectionately named Glamorous Glen 3, after his wife Glennice. The aircraft was cruising at patrol altitude when Jagger suddenly spotted a group of Me-262 jets attempting to intercept a formation of bombers. These jets executed their typical attack run, diving rapidly through the streamer of Allied bombers, unleashing a brief burst of gunfire, then swiftly zooming upward to regain altitude thanks to their incredible speed advantage. Jagger watched helplessly as the jets disappeared into the clouds, seemingly escaping unscathed. Official doctrine advised against pursuing those highly maneuverable jets, considering such an effort futile. Nonetheless, Jagger was not one to accept defeat so easily. He made a calculated decision. Since the Me-262s had to land eventually, and their fuel supplies were limited, they could not afford prolonged combat or unnecessary risk. Recognizing this opportunity, he broke away from the bomber formation, descending through the clouds and emerging at a lower altitude mere miles from the airfield at Acma. Below him, Jagger observed a solitary Me-262 in the process of landing. Its landing gear and flaps were extended, and its speed was noticeably reduced, probably down to around 150 miles per hour, as it lined up for its final approach. The German pilot was completely focused on landing, apparently unaware of the incoming danger from above. Jagger, seizing his moment, pushed his throttle to maximum and adjusted in the chaos of combat. The aircraft careened unexpectedly, rolling inverted before plunging into the dense cover of the woods mere hundreds of feet short of the designated runway threshold. The ensuing crash erupted in a spectacular explosion, sending a blazing ball of orange flames soaring into the sky. Yet, in the midst of this destructive display, Jagger had no moment to indulge in victory or relief. His focus remained sharp, his instincts honed for the chaos unfolding around him. As he pressed on, Acma's defensive guns came into immediate action, unleashing a deadly barrage. The powerful 88mm shells burst with thunderous echoes, exploding in fiery bursts around Jagger's Mustang as he raced across the airfield at incredible speed and a dangerously low altitude just above the treetops. The situation was tenuous at best. His sole option was to maintain a straight-line trajectory down the length of the runway, leveraging his speed to outrun the deadly target that was the flak crew's aiming adjustment. Tracers, streaking like deadly arcs of light from both sides, crisscrossed the field, illuminating the chaos below. In the tumult of the attack, some of the projectiles fired from one side of the runway unexpectedly struck their intended targets. Gun positions on the opposite side, adding a layer of unintended chaos to the skirmish. Despite the intense barrage, Jagger kept his focus, flying his P-51 Mustang low and at a swift clip, streaking past the far end of the field. With calculated precision and a burst of aggressive maneuvering, he pulled his aircraft into a sharp, hard climb, then dove toward the safety of a nearby valley. This daring action marked him as a survivor of one of the most perilous tactical scenarios in air combat. Attacking an enemy airfield in broad daylight at minimal altitude. It was a textbook example of the dangers faced by even the most seasoned pilots, but also a stark demonstration that the formidable German Me-262 jets could, in fact, be hunted down and eliminated. Jagger later recounted the fight with a restrained sense of understatement, as was his usual manner. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down," he said. "Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell?" His words reflected a mixture of bravado and pragmatic acknowledgement of the ruthlessness of combat, an attitude common among veterans who understood that victory often demanded the utmost in daring and ruthlessness. Throughout late 1944 and into 1945, the American fighter pilots meticulously refined their tactics for engaging jet aircraft, relying heavily on lessons learned through direct combat experience and detailed scrutiny of gun camera footage. These combat exercises demonstrated that the P-51 Mustang was uniquely well suited for such missions, thanks to its exceptional range and endurance. Fully equipped with internal fuel and 2 wingdrop tanks, a Mustang could stay airborne for more than 7 hours, granting its pilot the ability to loiter around known jet bases for extended durations, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When jet aircraft, such as the Me-262s, appeared on the horizon, Mustang pilots capitalized on their altitude advantage, executing rapid dives to attack. During these high-speed descents, the Mustang could fleetingly approach or even surpass speeds of 500 miles per hour, an impressive feat that allowed them to catch the vulnerable, exposed moments of the jet aircraft during their most critical phases of operation. Timing was everything. Attacking jets during their takeoff roll necessitated early detection and swift positioning to strike before they could gain altitude. Conversely, attacking during landing approaches required patience and precise judgment, observing from a safe distance until the jet was committed to its landing path and had its gear and flaps fully deployed, offering a clear, predictable target. This strategic mastery was built on persistent observation and relentless analysis of German jet operational patterns. The American pilots became intimately familiar with the routines of Me-262s, noting that they most often operated during specific windows, mornings and late afternoons, when visibility was optimal. However, the sun's angle during these times often hampered visual targeting, making detection more challenging for the defenders. Further insights revealed that Me-262s typically flew in pairs or small formations, rarely operating alone, creating an opportunity for targeted attacks. Destroying one jet often allowed the pilots to take advantage of the chaos to engage others. Moreover, German pilots, limited by their fuel constraints, could not afford to abort their landings and try again. Once an Me-262 committed to a final approach with low fuel, its pilot had little option but to proceed, regardless of incoming threats. This psychological pressure played directly into the hands of the attacking Mustang pilots, who knew that once a jet committed to landing, the pilot was unable to break away. For the Mustang pilot, this knowledge provided a crucial advantage. With confidence that the target was committed and somewhat trapped, the attacking pilot could press his attack without hesitation, knowing that the enemy had limited options for escape or counterattack. The combination of this tactical understanding, the aircraft's superior speed, and the aircraft, be it a fighter, bomber, or jet, could not suddenly accelerate with the kind of abruptness needed to escape an increasingly aggressive pursuit or attack. The Luftwaffe's defensive strategies grew more intricate and layered over time, evolving to counter new threats and tactics, yet some core issues remained deeply entrenched and essentially unsolvable. As a result, the alleyways and approach corridors that pilots used to reach their targets became more congested and heavily fortified, with some of these pathways guarded by defensive emplacements featuring more than 100 guns of various calibers, meticulously arranged to inflict maximum damage upon any approaching enemy. In response to these formidable defenses, the Allied air cover was also intensified and refined. Pilots flying the formidable Focke-Wulf FW-190D and the twin-engine TA-152H were specifically ordered to seek out and engage German fighters hovering near jet bases, regardless of the immediate tactical context or the apparent threat level. This aggressive stance aimed to prevent the Germans from gaining a foothold or establishing aerial superiority. Similarly, pilots operating the sleek Messerschmitt Me-262s were given detailed instructions to adopt unpredictable approach patterns, deliberately executing erratic turns and altitude shifts. These maneuvers were intended to complicate enemy intercepts and reduce the chances of a successful engagement. Some German bases even resorted to deploying smoke generators during critical moments, such as landing operations, in an attempt to conceal their activity and make targeting more difficult for Allied fighters. Despite these tactical innovations and defensive measures, the underlying mathematical and logistical realities persisted. The Me-262s, for example, required specific airfields equipped with particular fuel supplies to maximize their operational effectiveness. Their flying time was inherently limited, constraining their range and endurance. Allied fighters could saturate the airspace around jet bases with overwhelming numbers, creating a near certainty that an engagement, whether on takeoff or during flight, was nearly unavoidable. These constraints meant that German jets could not evade the common realities of military aviation: limited fuel, confined operating ranges, and the persistent threat of fighter interception, in spite of their technological advantages. One of the most striking examples of these tactical realities occurred on February 25, in the year of 1945, when the Allies demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of surprise and coordinated attack. On that day, aircraft from the 55th Fighter Group, flying North American P-51 Mustangs, launched a surprise assault on the Geilstadt airfield, targeting a group of Me-262 jets during their takeoff run. The timing was impeccable. The American P-51s arrived just as multiple jets began their hurried escape from the ground, catching the Germans completely off guard in the chaos of their departure. The attack was flawlessly executed, leading to the destruction of 6 Me-262s either on the runway or during the takeoff itself. Several additional jets sustained damage, a testament to the ferocity and precision of the strike. These losses represented a considerable percentage of the operational jets available to that German unit, impacting their ability to respond effectively in subsequent engagements. Didactics from German military records reveal that the jets involved belonged to the now infamous Kampfverband Kommando Afrika, KFKA, 54, a bomber squadron that had been hastily re-equipped with jet fighters but was plagued by a lack of adequate pilot training in these advanced aircraft. This attack by the 55th Fighter Group starkly demonstrated that concentrated, well-planned fighter sweeps against vulnerable jet bases during known operational periods could yield spectacular results. However, these missions also carried significant risk, as they often exposed the attacking aircraft to concentrated defenses and retaliatory fire. During the engagement, several Mustangs sustained damage from defensive gunfire, but despite this, the tactical success was undeniable. It highlighted the value of surprise and aggressive tactics against the German jets. The psychological impact on German Me-262 pilots was profound and long-lasting. These pilots were considered some of the most skilled and carefully selected aviators in the Luftwaffe, often veterans with extensive combat experience, who initially approached their missions with confidence in the technological superiority of their aircraft. The repeated losses, especially during critical phases such as takeoff and landing, began to erode that confidence, planting seeds of dread around those operations. Every sortie, every takeoff, and every landing became fraught with anxiety, as pilots knew that Allied fighters or ground-based defenses might be waiting for them. The knowledge that once committed to a landing, they might not have any escape options left, combined with the harsh reality that their fuel gauges often showed near empty tanks, amplified the psychological strain. These factors did not just influence morale but also impacted the pilots' performance and decision-making processes under pressure. The attack on Berlin on March 18, in the year of 1945, exemplified both the potential of the Me-262 as a weapon of strategic importance and the inherent limitations of its design and deployment, rendering it ultimately unable to alter the course of the war decisively. On that day, a massive formation consisting of over 1,200 Allied bombers, it was arguably the final significant aerial confrontation over German territory during World War II. In this climactic engagement, The Luftwaffe assembled an impressive formation of 37 Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters, all drawn from the Yakushvada 7 unit, preparing for what would be one of the largest coordinated jet attacks on Allied bomber formations to date. This sortie represented an unprecedented effort to leverage the capabilities of Germany's advanced jet technology within a single mission, aiming to decisively challenge the overwhelming strength of the Allied strategic bombing forces. Leading the attack was Gruppenkommandeur Oberleutnant Gau Wegmann, who directed his squadron in a relatively loose formation as they advanced toward the incoming wave of bombers. For the first time in operational combat, Wegmann and his wingmen employed R-4M unguided rockets, an innovative weapon system designed specifically for high explosive effects against formations of heavy bombers. These rockets, carried in underwing racks with a total of 12 per aircraft, had been engineered to detonate in close proximity to their targets. The intent was to produce maximum destructive fragmentation and blast damage without the necessity for precise aiming, a strategic advantage given the difficulty of hitting fast-moving, large bomber formations. As Wegmann's squadron engaged, their rockets tore into a formation of 60 B-17 flying fortresses. Eyewitness reports and post-battle assessments revealed that several bombers were struck and appeared to be falling from the sky, indicating the effectiveness of the new rocket weapon in disrupting the formation. Simultaneously, other Me-262 pilots intensified their attacks using their more traditional armament, 30mm cannons. Thanks to the exceptional speed and agility of the jet fighters, they were able to make multiple passes through the bomber formation before the fighter escorts could effectively respond and intercept. The encounter was brief yet ferocious, characterized by intense dogfights and swift attacks from both sides. According to German claims, the attacking pilots downed 12 heavy bombers and managed to shoot down one American fighter aircraft during the melee. However, wartime records from the United States paint a different picture, indicating that the actual losses were slightly less optimistic. Approximately 8 heavy bombers were shot down, and 3 Me-262 jets were destroyed in combat. This discrepancy is typical of wartime aerial combat, where confusion, chaos, and the fog of war often lead to inflated claims of victories, a phenomenon well documented across both sides involved. Even when accepting the German assertions at face value, it becomes clear that the jet fighters accounted for less than 1% of the entire attacking force. Meanwhile, the massive formation of bombers continued its path unabated, reaching its target and unleashing its payload of destruction on strategic targets deep within Germany. The overall impact on the strategic bombing campaign remained negligible. The relentless aerial campaign pressed forward with little interruption. The engagement resulted in the loss of 5 American fighter pilots who failed to return home and caused the deaths or capture of dozens of bomber crew members, human costs that weighed heavily on both sides. Despite the limited tactical success of this individual attack, from the perspective of Allied strategic planning, the mission was viewed as a comprehensive success. The Germans recognized the significance of this effort, especially through the leadership of Adolf Galland, who had once served as the Luftwaffe's general of fighters. Galland had been dismissed earlier in the war following disagreements with Hermann Göring over fighter tactics and strategies. By February of 1945, he had re-emerged as the commander of a new elite jet fighter unit, known as Jagdverband 44, formed explicitly to utilize the Me-262 at its maximum potential. This unit quickly gathered Germany's most accomplished Air Force aces, pilots with hundreds of mixed aerial victories, forming a prestigious and formidable formation. Jagdverband 44 was allocated the most advanced aircraft, sufficient fuel supplies, and priority support, representing Germany's last concerted effort to deploy jet fighters in significant numbers during the war. Galland himself flew combat missions within this unit, continuing to score victories with both his cannon and the explosive R-4M rockets. Many of his comrades also reported success, managing to shoot down enemy bombers and even hitting escorting fighters under favorable conditions for jet tactics. However, despite their skill and tactical innovations, the operational lifespan of Jagdverband 44 was disappointingly short, measured in weeks rather than months. The relentless Allied strategic bombing campaign targeted their bases repeatedly, forcing the unit to relocate multiple times. Fuel shortages further hampered operational readiness, grounding many aircraft for days at a time while they awaited crucial spare parts and engine repairs. The operational realities of the Me-262 revealed a stark contrast between its promising theoretical capabilities and the practical limitations faced in combat conditions. Historical records indicate that approximately 1,443 Me-262s had been produced during the war. Yet, only a small fraction, roughly 200 to 300, actually participated in combat missions. The vast majority of the assembled jets were lost during the period of its operational deployment. The German jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262, often faced logistical and maintenance challenges that hindered its sustained combat effectiveness. As a result, the number of these aircraft available for combat at any given moment rarely exceeded 50, and on most days, their active fleet was closer to a quarter of that figure, approximately 25 aircraft. This relatively limited number was set against an overwhelmingly superior Allied fighter force, which, at its peak, boasted a strength exceeding 5,000 aircraft, not counting the vast number of bombers under Allied command. The stark disparity between the German jet force and the Allied airpower made the task of achieving battlefield dominance extraordinarily difficult for the Germans, with the mathematical odds favoring the Allies heavily. Despite these hurdles, pilots flying the Me-262 reported claiming around 542 Allied aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat. However, historians and military analysts recognize that wartime claims often involve overestimations, with both sides tending to inflate their victory tallies. After the war, detailed analyses conducted by American researchers suggested that the actual number of Allied aircraft destroyed by the Me-262 was significantly lower than claimed. Furthermore, the rate at which the Allies effectively eliminated Me-262 fighters exceeded the rate at which Germany could produce and train new pilots for these jets, gradually diminishing the operational strength of the German jet fleet. American air units, notably the P-51 Mustang fighters, were credited with approximately 92.5 confirmed kills of the Me-262. This figure encompasses kills achieved not only in air-to-air combat but also those resulting from aircraft destroyed during ground attacks, takeoff, or landing accidents. The 357th Fighter Group, commanded by Chuck Jagger, led American efforts with 18.5 confirmed jet kills. The 55th Fighter Group claimed 17 confirmed victories, the 78th and the 339th Fighter Groups each credited with 15. Meanwhile, the British Royal Air Force contributed additional combat victories, primarily through their Hawker Tempest and Spitfire fighters, claiming around 12 jet kills in total. The cumulative loss figures paint a grim picture. The losses inflicted upon the Me-262 fleet consistently outnumbered the replacements that Germany could produce, leading to a decline in operational capability despite continued production of the aircraft until Germany's surrender in May of 1945. Post-war interviews with former German ace pilots who flew the Me-262 reveal a range of opinions regarding its combat effectiveness. One such pilot, Georg Peter Ida, who had managed to achieve 12 kills, including 9 P-51 Mustangs, admitted that the aircraft's high speed at altitude made it relatively safe for bomber intercept missions. However, he also noted that Allied countermeasures, such as improved tactics and defensive equipment, progressively offset this advantage. Another German ace, Walter Dahl, credited with 11 victories, 6 of which were P-51 Mustangs, highlighted that constraints such as limited fuel supplies and engine reliability issues meant the jet's theoretical superiority often went unrealized in practical combat situations. Dahl emphasized that these factors restricted tactical flexibility and clouded the jet's perceived advantages. Heinrich Bahr, who achieved 16 of his total of 24 aerial victories with the Me-262, expressed the view that the aircraft arrived too late in the war's timeline and in insufficient numbers to influence the overall outcome. Franz Schall, the top German ace with 17 confirmed kills, including 6 4-engine bombers and 10 P-51 fighters, was killed in action during April 1945. Earlier in his career, Schall had expressed skepticism about the jet's actual combat capabilities, citing its high approach speeds and wide turning radius as significant disadvantages that hindered engagement with more maneuverable Allied fighters. The lessons learned from the operations of the Me-262 had a profound influence on the development of post-war jet fighters worldwide. Allied engineers and scientists conducted extensive studies of captured jet aircraft at various testing facilities in both the United States and Britain. These analyses confirmed that, from a design perspective, the basic concept of the Me-262 was sound and ahead of its time. Nonetheless, they also identified critical technological limitations that constrained the aircraft's operational potential. One of the most significant issues was engine technology, which remained a bottleneck throughout the war. The engines of the Me-262, while revolutionary, suffered from limited lifespan, inconsistent performance, and reliability problems that restricted operational endurance and tactical flexibility. Building on the lessons learned from the Me-262, American jet designs such as the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and the Republic F-84 Thunderjet incorporated improvements in engine durability, throttle response, and overall reliability, addressing many of the deficiencies identified in the German aircraft. Similarly, Soviet designs like the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15 benefited from early innovations in jet propulsion, leading to more practical and reliable fighter aircraft that would dominate the early Cold War era. The development of the Messerschmitt Me-262 was a groundbreaking milestone in aerial warfare, representing the world's first operational jet fighter. Its innovative design incorporated several advancements aimed at overcoming its earlier shortcomings, such as increased fuel efficiency and reinforced airframes. These improvements were crucial, as they directly addressed the specific vulnerabilities that Allied fighters had exploited during their attacks. The introduction of jet propulsion drastically altered the aerial combat landscape, pushing both sides to adapt rapidly in an intense technological arms race. Among the many pilots who successfully took on the formidable Me-262, a cohort of exceptionally skilled individuals emerged, each becoming highly regarded within the fighter community for their bravery and tactical ingenuity. These combat pilots' rigorous reports and combat accounts became invaluable resources for intelligence agencies and flight instructors alike, who studied their experiences meticulously to develop new strategies for countering this advanced threat. In addition to the well-known figures like Urban Drew and Chuck Jagger, Dozens of other pilots repeatedly scored victories against the jet fighters by applying the sophisticated tactics they had learned through relentless, often perilous, practice and first-hand combat experience. The pilots who engaged these jets shared certain defining traits. They possessed extraordinarily sharp eyesight, enabling them to identify targets at great distances and react swiftly to enemy maneuvers. Their precision in gunnery was nothing short of remarkable, often hitting moving targets with impressive accuracy amidst the chaos of combat. Many of these aviators also exhibited aggressive temperaments, driven by a fierce sense of duty and the understanding that aggressive tactics could tip the balance in crucial battles. However, such bravery frequently entailed accepting enormous risks. Attacking jet bases surrounded by dense anti-aircraft fire, or flak, required a level of courage bordering on recklessness. Despite the danger, these pilots continued to fly such missions, fully aware of the vital strategic importance of neutralizing the rapidly growing jet threat that threatened to undermine Allied air superiority. The human toll of these engagements was devastating for both sides. American fighter pilots, slaughtered during assaults on the jet bases deep within enemy territory, often met their end far from the safety of home soil. Many perished in fiery crashes caused by damage from enemy anti-aircraft fire or mechanical failures. In some instances, their bodies were never recovered from remote crash sites across Germany, leaving loved ones and military officials haunted by unresolved losses. Conversely, the elite German pilots tasked with operating the Me-262 faced similar perilous circumstances. As skilled as they were, they represented a precious and limited resource for the Luftwaffe. Each one lost was irreplaceable, with the rate of attrition threatening to decimate their dwindling cadre of experienced jet pilots. The overall training pipeline that produced these pilots was increasingly strained and ultimately unsustainable, as Germany's shrinking resources and worsening war situation made it impossible to replace seasoned personnel quickly. The loss of seasoned pilots and the constant strain of combat inflicted severe stress on the German jet forces. Fatigue, combined with the high stakes and relentless demands of operations, led to more frequent errors in judgment, miscalculations during takeoff and landing, and a general decline in combat effectiveness, even among the most experienced aviators. As 1945 dawned, the infrastructure supporting the operation of the Me-262, including maintenance facilities, supply chains for spare parts, and airfield facilities, gradually disintegrated under relentless Allied bombing and advancing ground forces. Strategic bombing campaigns targeted key refineries and manufacturing plants, causing shortages of specialized jet fuel, which was essential for sustained operations. Because many of the factories producing engines and other critical components had been destroyed or captured, the availability of replacement engines dwindled drastically, leaving existing aircraft grounded or operational only sporadically. Supply chains for spare parts and maintenance components eroded further as Allied bombers decimated supply hubs, and trained technicians were either killed in raids or reassigned to infantry units as Germany's military resources became increasingly desperate for manpower. As the front lines pushed eastward, German airfields suffered direct attacks, with several landing strips overtaken or rendered unusable. By April of Timeline's year 1945, the remaining Me-262 units had become scattered, sometimes operating from makeshift runways in wooded areas, or from sections of autobahns that had been temporarily cleared for aircraft operations. Many of these aircraft were hidden from aerial reconnaissance in dense forests, and the crews worked under severe shortages of fuel and spare parts, often operating in a state of constant alert and imminent threat from Allied air attacks. The final weeks of the Me-262's operational career, in April and early May of 1945, were characterized by a period of chaos and desperation. The various scattered units flew sporadically, often without coordination from Central Command as the collapse of military infrastructure continued. Pilots, faced with dwindling fuel supplies, took to the skies on individual missions, most of which targeted whatever enemy targets they could find, preferably supply depots, retreating enemy units, or military installations, rather than engaging in organized, strategic campaigns. Some pilots, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, chose to fly their jets into Allied. The introduction of the Me-262 during the final stages of World War II marked a truly revolutionary leap in aviation technology. Despite its groundbreaking design and impressive combat record in the closing days of the conflict, the jet fighter faced numerous insurmountable obstacles that limited its overall strategic impact. Throughout the war, a handful of brave pilots, including members of the Jagdverband 44, remained actively engaged in combat missions right up until the very last days of hostilities. These pilots managed to score kills even as the German military infrastructure was fundamentally disintegrating, underscoring the aircraft's formidable capabilities amidst a collapsing state. Post-war evaluations by American and British aviation experts converged on a single conclusion. The Me-262 was a technological marvel, a true symbol of innovation and engineering genius. It represented a leap forward in aircraft design and performance, yet arrived too late to alter the tide of the war. This consensus was rooted in the understanding that, despite the jet's potential, numerous strategic and logistical factors hindered its ultimate effectiveness. Even if Adolf Hitler had not delayed the program by insisting that a bomber variant take precedence, even if engine reliability issues had been rectified sooner, and even if production quantities had been significantly increased, the fundamental strategic environment of late-war Germany was unfavorable for such advanced aircraft. The country was suffering from scarce fuel supplies, a shortage of properly trained pilots, and a critical lack of air superiority, conditions that rendered even the most technologically advanced fighters vulnerable and limited in operational scope. The inability of the Me-262 to address these systemic problems underscored an essential lesson in military aviation. Technological prowess alone does not guarantee victory. The aircraft's performance advantages could not compensate for the broader strategic and logistical deficiencies faced by the German Luftwaffe in 1944. The combat encounters between the Me-262 and the American P-51 Mustangs, however, extended their influence well beyond the immediate context of the war. These engagements fundamentally shaped subsequent doctrines of air combat, emphasizing that technological supremacy does not automatically translate into tactical success. One of the most enduring legacies of these encounters is the recognition that exploiting an enemy's vulnerabilities, rather than solely engaging their strengths, is crucial in aerial warfare. This principle became embedded in fighter pilots' training routines, emphasizing tactics that leveraged altitude, speed, and timing to gain an advantage. For example, American pilots learned to ascend to higher altitudes to build velocity before plunging into attacks, patiently patrolling known enemy operating areas to intercept the jets, and timing their assaults during vulnerable flight phases such as takeoff or landing. These tactics proved effective even as new generations of high-performance fighters emerged in succeeding decades, perpetually adapting to rising technological standards. Personal narratives from pilots who participated in these battles vividly capture the psychological and tactical demands of fighting the Me-262. Chuck Jagger, in his autobiography and interviews, recalled the intense risk and split-second decision-making that characterized these encounters. He described the fraught process of loitering near German airfields, fully aware that the moment they launched their attack, they could be met with fierce anti-aircraft fire or interceptions by enemy fighters. The delicate calculations required to time dives for maximum speed, all while managing limited information and facing unpredictable enemy responses, underscored the high stakes of aerial combat. Yet, amidst the danger, there was considerable satisfaction in demonstrating that American fighters could successfully challenge what many considered an invincible adversary. Urban Drew's reflections, made publicly known in the year of 1983, convey a different aspect of this tense period. Having only received official recognition for his victories decades later, Drew expressed frustration at the prolonged denial of his achievements, which had lingered due to lack of corroborating evidence. Despite the delays in acknowledgement, he emphasized that the importance of the mission and the courage required to undertake it transcended personal accolades. His words reflected a broader understanding that success in aviation combat was not merely about individual heroism but also about the collective effort to counter enemy threats and uphold strategic objectives. The engineering insights gained from combat experiences with the Me-262 directly influenced the subsequent development of the Bell P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. As the Second World War drew to a close, Lockheed's engineers meticulously examined captured Me-262 aircraft, meticulously studying their engines, airframes, and systems to understand their performance capabilities and limitations. These investigations informed the design improvements incorporated into the P-80 Shooting Star, laying the groundwork for modern jet aviation. In the United States, the lessons distilled from the unprecedented performance of the Me-262 served as vital stepping stones in the ongoing evolution of military aircraft, shaping tactics, engineering, and strategic thinking for decades to come. In essence, the story of the Me-262 encapsulates a chapter of technological innovation fraught with strategic challenges. Its legacy endures not only in the history of aviation but also in the enduring principles of aerial combat. That victory depends not just on the machines themselves but on the tactical adeptness in exploiting the weaknesses of an adversary, and on the continuous drive to adapt and improve in the ever-evolving landscape of warfare. The story of the Me-262 is a compelling mix of remarkable achievements and strategic shortcomings, a narrative rich with both triumphs and missed opportunities. The design of this groundbreaking aircraft incorporated several critical improvements over its predecessors, notably featuring engines that were not only more durable but also offered enhanced throttle responsiveness. These advancements directly addressed some of the most severe weaknesses that had plagued the earlier Me-262 models, which had often struggled with engine reliability and sluggish power adjustments. Furthermore, the newer engines utilized in the P-80s significantly improved fuel efficiency, enabling aircraft to operate over much greater distances than the original maximum range of around 650 miles demonstrated by the early Me-262 variants. This extension of operational reach was an important step forward for jet fighters, broadening their tactical and strategic versatility. Additionally, the landing gear on the P-80s was reinforced to withstand higher stress loads, which ultimately reduced the high rate of accidents that had previously plagued German jet operations during their initial deployment phases. Such safety improvements contributed to more effective and confident pilot operations. To bolster pilot awareness and improve operational safety during the most critical moments of flight, takeoff and landing, designers enhanced cockpit visibility, offering clearer sightlines that made situational awareness more reliable. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union undertook a keenly detailed study of the Me-262, employing captured aircraft and engines shipped to specialized research facilities for rigorous testing. The insights gained from these investigations significantly influenced the development of Soviet jet fighters like the MiG-15 and the Yak-15, though Soviet engineers also integrated British engine technology obtained through espionage and clandestine transfer, further enriching their technological repertoire. The combined analysis of Me-262 technology and the infusion of other innovations accelerated the global dissemination of jet fighter knowledge, propelling the rapid shift from piston-powered aircraft to jet propulsion during the late 1940s and early 1950s. Within a decade following the conclusion of World War II, propeller-driven fighters had become relics of a bygone era in nearly every air force worldwide, replaced entirely by jet-powered fighters commanding the skies. An overarching review of the Me-262's operational history reveals a nuanced legacy. While the aircraft achieved tangible tactical successes, these did not translate into a strategic advantage for Germany. Individual pilots often achieved impressive numbers of aerial kills, and specific missions showcased the jet's formidable capabilities under favorable conditions. Nonetheless, these victories were largely superficial in the context of the broader conflict. The overall impact of the Me-262 on the Allied strategic air campaign remained minimal. Strategic bombing campaigns persisted with relentless intensity, and Allied fighters successfully maintained air superiority. Ground forces, supported effectively by Allied air power, pressed into Germany with confidence, unimpeded by the presence of the German jet fighters. The extensive resources allocated to the development and production of the Me-262, encompassing scarce materials, limited manufacturing capacity, and highly skilled labor, might arguably have been better invested in more conventional fighter aircraft. Such alternatives could have been produced more efficiently and operated more effectively, considering the constraints of available fuel supplies and pilot training levels. The recurring narrative of German pilots confidently flaunting their jets only to encounter American Mustang aces during moments of vulnerability exemplifies the limitations of relying solely on technological prowess to resolve strategic challenges. This history underscores that developing the world's first operational jet fighter was a monumental achievement, representing a true technological breakthrough with the potential for significant tactical advantages. Yet, despite this pioneering status, the Me-262's influence was ultimately curtailed by fundamental disadvantages: insufficient numbers, strained resources, limited fuel supplies, shortage of trained personnel, and the strategic positioning of Germany itself. American and Allied pilots, operating aircraft that were comparatively less advanced but supported by overwhelming industrial strength, comprehensive training regimes, reliable logistical networks, and sound tactical doctrines, succeeded in defeating the technological marvel of the Me-262. Their persistence, continuous innovation, and professional excellence proved decisive, underscoring that technological superiority alone cannot determine the outcome of warfare. In the final analysis, the Me-262 stands as one of aviation history's most fascinating examples of potential unrealized, a symbol of what might have been. It was an aircraft that demonstrated a glimpse into the future of aerial combat but arrived too late to alter the course of the war. Its record in combat, though impressive in some specific encounters, was ultimately insufficient to influence the broader strategic trajectory of the conflict. The American pilots who developed and executed tactics against it exemplified the resilience and ingenuity that ultimately rendered the jet's technological advantages moot in the face of relentless Allied pursuit and strategic superiority. The strategies devised to confront and neutralize the formidable jet threat in World War II earned their place in aviation history, but not because of technological dominance. Instead, they were rooted deeply in tactical ingenuity, exceptional bravery, and an unwavering refusal to surrender any advantage to what seemed an almost unbeatable adversary. These tactics demonstrated that human skill, when combined with effective doctrine, decisive leadership, and relentless determination, could bridge the gap created by technological shortcomings. The battle for air superiority, particularly during the critical period from late October 1944 to May 1945, vividly illustrated this truth. In October of 1944, the German Luftwaffe introduced the Messerschmitt Me 262, a revolutionary jet fighter that initially appeared invincible. However, within less than 6 months, the tide shifted dramatically in favor of the Allies, culminating in the last jet operations by May of 1945. The swift transition from German overconfidence to Allied ascendancy was not attributable to a single decisive factor. Instead, it was the result of a meticulously coordinated effort to exploit known vulnerabilities of the Me 262, coupled with persistent pressure that kept the German jet program from establishing a sustainable operational footing. Each Me 262 lost during takeoff or landing was not simply a materiel loss. It was a blow to the overall operational capacity, reducing the number available for crucial bomber interceptions and defensive missions. Furthermore, every pilot who was killed or captured represented an invaluable wellspring of expertise, tactical insight, and training lost to the German war effort. The relentless nature of the Allied attacks on jet bases complicated German operations significantly. As bases were targeted repeatedly, their locations became more scattered, and their operational effectiveness decreased. Dispersed units, less synchronized, struggling to mount the kind of coordinated defenses that might have changed the outcome. As the final months unfolded, German pilots fought with increasing desperation. Their morale was low. Logistical support waned due to fuel shortages that limited sorties to only the most vital missions, and engine failures grounded many aircraft for extended periods. Every takeoff and landing became a potential nightmare. Allied fighter patrols carefully monitored airfields, turning these critical moments into deadly threats. Base relocations and redeployments further disrupted operational continuity and morale among the German airmen. Yet, despite these overwhelming challenges, a remarkable number of pilots continued to take to the skies until the very last hours of the war. Their unwavering commitment stemmed from a complex mixture of duty, honor, and hope that their efforts might somehow influence the course of the conflict. They understood that victory was no longer within reach, but they fought on nonetheless, driven by a steadfast sense of responsibility and professionalism, willing to face impossible odds. The war's end came not with a glorious, decisive clash but through a slow and inevitable collapse of Germany's military infrastructure. By early May of 1945, the once formidable jets, which had symbolized the potential to dominate Allied skies, were abandoned at airfields or hidden in forests to prevent their capture. Many were deliberately destroyed by their own crews, who sought to deny valuable technology to the advancing Allied forces. A few jets were flown to Allied territory and surrendered, but most simply ceased flying, as fuel supplies dwindled and ongoing maintenance became impossible. The jets that had once seemed poised to eradicate Allied bombers from the German skies now lay scattered across the landscape, silent remnants of a technological promise unfulfilled by operational realities. These aircraft stood as stark monuments to the gap between potential and achievement, a reminder that technological innovation alone could not guarantee victory without effective tactics and human resilience. The pilots flying the American P-51 Mustangs, who had relentlessly hunted down these jets, returned home as the war drew to a close, victorious in their mission and in the broader struggle to contain and eliminate the jet threat. In the final analysis, this victory was secured not through superior technology alone, but by the tenacity, tactical acumen, and courage of those who fought. The Allies' ability to adapt, exploit weaknesses, and persist despite overwhelming odds ultimately rendered the jet menace ineffective. Through the application of superior tactics, they dismantled the promise of the German jet program, reaffirming the fundamental military principle that human skill and strategic innovation can overcome even the most advanced technological threats.